Welcome to Healthcare du Jour, where we dish up and digest the latest in healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, sit back as we bring you insight, commentary, and discussion on trending topics to the table, all expertly served up by our host and his guests. Now here's your host, Matt Fisher.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining as we dive into the hottest topics in healthcare. I'm your host, Matt Fisher, and the manager is Jason Prestinario, Chief Executive Officer of Particle Health. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
So, Jason, what I always like to do at the beginning of every show is to give my guests a chance to provide more of an introduction in terms of who they are and what they do. So, Jason, the floor is yours.
Yeah, appreciate it. So first off, as you mentioned, I'm CEO of Particle Health, and we are a healthcare data platform, really, that's driving the leveraging of medical records pulled from across the whole continuity of care, the whole ecosystem, to pull together longitudinal medical records on patients, and then do a whole lot of processing, enrichment, analytics, AI-driven workflows on top of that information in order to make that data and information accessible, useful, and really to drive outcomes that advance the treatment and care of patients. So that's kind of what we do. My background is very much, I come from a data and technology engineering background. I was at Palantir for a number of years, launched a forward deployed data science team there, got interested in healthcare just because it was actually one of the few industries I hadn't spent much time working in, and was really excited about just how important it is, and just how big a part, frankly, even of our economy it is, and just the data challenges that seemed present, right? So I very much am a data guy through and through. And, the data seemed interesting, but it also seemed challenging and disparate, and very different, frankly, than many other industries that I was a part of. As Palantir is very much known for, it is pretty agnostic to both industry and data. And healthcare was an area where that seemed really difficult to do, right? It seemed that it was very rare the way that it is formulated for an enterprise player to have all the data they need. And so I got really fascinated. 2016, ended up joining Komodo Health. I architected Komodo's data platform, led data and data science. And then in 2020, ended up launching a business unit within Komodo that was really designed around taking that platform to the rest of healthcare outside of Komodo's core life sciences market. Grew that out for about 2.5 years, and then was interested in continuing to push towards, for me, it was always understanding and being excited about the patient workflows. And so opportunity came for me to join Particle Health and kind of move from de-identified claims data into identified medical records. But I was really excited to pull a lot of the same concepts of how to build a platform on top of this information and go from data to insights to action. And so that's what we've done.
It sounds like a very interesting journey. And since you already kind of answered my typical second question, which is what got you into healthcare, I'll ask you, what has surprised you the most since you've transitioned into the healthcare space?
Yeah, I think the honest answer to that is I got into this space really believing that there were some important technical challenges to be solved. And what I've come to realize is those challenges do exist, but it is the non-technical challenges that really are the ones that are really sort of holding us back, that need to be sort of fixed first and foremost. And so that's obviously also a big part of what I spend a lot of my time thinking about these days.
Yeah, and actually, that's a great point. It's as you said, it's some of the non-technical issues are the biggest ones you've seen. So, as you were talking about, leveraging medical records and pulling them in from disparate places to create the longitudinal record and drive analyses and insights, what are some of those non-technical barriers or complications that you've seen as you're trying to, create that longitudinal record and ingest all the information?
Yeah, so I'll start relatively general, and then we can definitely get into more and more specifics. But from a general view, I think first and foremost, you know, if you're going to try to leverage identified data in healthcare, you're going to need to have four different disciplines just to kind of get you off the ground. So first, as always, right, you will need kind of data engineering and data science. Okay, well, that's kind of true in every industry. But in healthcare, you're also going to need to layer on clinical understanding, clinical expertise, but then also privacy and security, right, which is also a really core part of obviously identified healthcare data, right? We have, HIPAA as a very clear set of boundary lines and guidelines and rules that we need to be really thoughtful of in terms of how we leverage this data. And so bringing together those four disciplines that are all pretty disparate, frankly, is kind of a key starting point to, frankly, doing anything with healthcare data.
So, kind of thinking about those four disciplines, is one more challenging than the others, or is it they're kind of have their own unique challenges that are, when you look at them separately, about equal, or kind of from that approach is, where, as I said, do you find those biggest challenges as you're trying to bring those four pillars to bear?
Yeah, I mean, they all have their unique challenges. I actually think for me, what's always excited me is how they interact together in a very, very cool way. So I've always found it very interesting to think about how data protection, data privacy, and frankly, data science intermingle. And there's, and I actually am now forgetting, I learned recently, I had this slide that I used for a really long time, and I recently learned the gentleman's name that I want to be able to attribute to him, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Maybe I can follow up with you and let you know. But it is a graph that basically depicts on two different axes data usefulness versus data privacy. And the idea, right, is that we all tend to believe quite naturally as humans that things have linear trade-offs, right? So in order to have a little bit of data usefulness, you need to remove that same little bit of data protection and data privacy. And this kind of comes from a very natural sense on the extreme of, in order to protect data fully, uh, don't use it, right? If you never use the information, there is no risk of any sort of harm being done. And obviously, on the other extreme, right, the only way that you're going to be able to extract every piece of useful ounce out of that data is to, potentially completely risk its privacy and security. And what you come to realize is that it is not a linear trade-off, right? You can actually get a lot of usefulness out of data with while maintaining the vast majority of protection and safety on top of that data that you need. And so that interplay to me has always been, really fascinating because it actually lends itself to um, the opportunity to really create a lot of value and insight and better sort of treatment pathways for patients in healthcare if we can continue to sort of embrace that reality, right? Understanding that as much as something like HIPAA is incredibly, incredibly important. It was also, a concept that was written in 1996, and we have a whole lot of changes that have happened in terms of data and technology since then.
Yeah, but I think that interplay that you were just highlighting, if you start looking at some of the analyses and some of the insights that have been gleaned recently, it actually kind of intuitively makes sense because I think, as you're saying, like you can remove a lot of individual identifiers and still be able to get a lot of insight and value from parsing through and analyzing that data. So it also seems like kind of implicit in what you're saying is overcoming that expectation that you need fully identifiable data to be able to spot trends or identify other areas of interest.
That's right. I mean, I started right in my healthcare journey leveraging de-identified data. So for me, um, it which is almost kind of backwards, right? You almost kind of think of it as the most sort of obvious is identified data and so on and so forth. But I spent better part of a decade using de-identified data only. And I do not in any way feel like it limited my ability to provide value. Now, it's a different kind of value. Obviously, there was always going to be that point of, hey, if I was able to determine that this was the most effective, treatment pathway, in doing real world evidence studies or, determining the next best action, for a patient in a given line of therapy and so on and so forth. Obviously that work was leading to better identifying, right, what those right treatment pathways were. But there's always kind of this, well, what about this specific, patient that is being identified by some, de-identified token? That was always kind of in the back of my mind. But to your point, that's actually that's kind of the almost the easy part, right? The much more, interesting and challenging part is exactly that of, there is so much information that exists that we should be able to, leverage in order to better identify, right, to your point, those trends, those right treatment pathways, those effective journeys, and all of that is, pretty apparent as you start to put that information and data in a position where it can be used, right? Data science can be run on it.
Yeah, and I think kind of as you're saying, it's the first part is you just have to start working with the data and not feel like you're being held back if you're only getting certain pieces. It's you might be able to start going through it and get more insights than you anticipate. And then if you see limitations in what you've been able to produce, then you can potentially go back and figure out ways to get to more of that data. And for those of you just joining, I'm talking with Jason Prestinario from Particle Health, talking about all the use that you can make of data. And I know we're talking a lot about what you can do with the data. What challenges have you seen getting the data in the first place? Because I know going back to the beginning of the conversation, you said one of the things you're focused on is gathering data and creating that longitudinal record. And I'm sure many people in healthcare are very familiar with the fact that there's a reason there's so many of these pockets of data, and it doesn't seem like the industry has been able to figure out how do we get it all into one place or allows an individual to get all their own information into one place.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting that we're talking about leveraging de-identified data to spot some of these trends, and ironically, it's not surprising in many ways that I started there because it's actually a heck of a lot easier to get access to de-identified data than it is to get access to identified data, even your own identified data. So part of the reason of my transition, why I got excited about joining Particle Health and sort of going on this mission, was really because I read the Cures Act. And so the Cures Act was written in 2016, went into law, and effectively said that medical records needed to be programmatically made available, right, for all purposes of use under HIPAA, namely, right, treatment, payment, operations, and individual access. And so this is a law that went into effect in 2016. And so I'm reading as I'm, kind of thinking about potentially taking this role in 2023, right, about this, law that went into effect and sort of what it could mean. And I got fascinated because it, finally seemed like, hey, this is a way where access to identified, information is going to happen, right? And so, as it turns out, it's still not quite that easy to get access to your own medical records. In fact, I recently tried this myself, and made an individual access record request on myself, kind of through TEFCA and these programmatic means, and I got zero records back. It was very disheartening. And I've, recently I went to the ER and I went to hospital special surgery. I tore my Achilles and had to have a bunch of, surgery done and all of this. And so I definitely have records, right? And I definitely have things that I'd love to be able to use and know about. And so to your point, I think this is bringing it back full circle to this idea of getting access to all of these disparate sources of information, right? If you want to get access to, you have your, standard sort of primary care doc that works at, a health system, and you very much know it. There's probably a portal you can log into, you probably pay your bills through that portal. And, through that portal, you can sort of look at your own records and so on and so forth. But the beauty and the magic, right, is being able to get access to all of this disparate longitudinal records from everywhere in order to really sort of bring them together and see those insights and see those trends. As we were, one of the things I was doing in my time working in de-identified data was we did a bunch of work actually in hereditary amyloidosis and actually identifying in this very rare disease, identifying these types of patients before any of their providers did. And it's really difficult to spot because hereditary amyloidosis can present in a variety of different places, right? So it could end up being something that first gets noticed kind of more on the GI side, could end up more on the neuro side, could end up more on the cardio side. But of course, each of these different specialties, for a whole bunch of really good reasons, focus on their specialties, right? So they will think cardio, it's a heart problem. GI, right? It's something in your gut problems and so on and so forth. And none of these data points mix. And our healthcare system is very specialized and siloed today. And there isn't really a good place for all of those records and pieces of information and data points to mix. So to your point, ironically, on the de-identified side, I was able to mix all this information together and able to create models that identified, right, this is the type of patient that likely does have, this very rare condition and disease. But that's something that's really hard for us to do on the identified side today. And it should be easy.
And so kind of thinking, as you said, that it should be easy. And, you're also pointing to the 21st Century Cures Act and trying to open the doors to access. I guess a two-part question of, do you think the right tools are there under the law or under, maybe potential industry standard to get the access? And if those tools are there, you can try to drive it. What's holding us back?
Yeah. So generally speaking, the tools are there. Like I said, the technical abilities exist. It's not perfect in a variety of ways, but even today, it is pretty comprehensive for your doctor under a treatment sort of purpose of use to get access to all of your medical records. That's actually part of the core of what we do, is provide full longitudinal medical record access under a treatment purpose of use. And so that exists today and works relatively well from a technical means perspective. What is unfortunately, though, still true is, even though the Cures Act, was meant to cover, all these bases, it still doesn't actually cover all those bases today. So these other purposes of use outside of treatment, and namely when we're talking about individuals, right? Individual access, your ability to raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like access to all of my medical records, please, still does not work the same way treatment works today. And so while the technical means to do so, the pathways, the APIs are all largely available, the way to actually make that happen in practice is still very, very delayed and very, very non-complete. As I mentioned, for someone like me, getting back zero records is quite disheartening. and is the norm for folks today that are trying to get access to those records.
Yeah, and as you said, it's even thinking about the access provisions under 21st century cures, that was already building off the right of access under HIPAA. And all you have to do is look at all the settlements that the Office for Civil Rights has announced over the past several years. Right of access is an ongoing issue, to your point, and it feels like either there's not enough enforcement or not enough attention paid to it to actually get the industry to make a sea change on something that has been around for a pretty long time. And, kind of, I think as you're implying, the technology is fundamentally already set up to do it. You just have to kind of have the will to want to go in that direction.
Yeah. Well, so I'd say a couple things on that, right? So, the enforcement actions here, the frameworks have been set up. So, the final rule came out for cures and set up right sort of penalties for information blocking, and so information blocking is the very official term to refer to, again, the ability to enforce the compliance with the Cures Act and the sharing of information. So the lack of doing so is information blocking. And so those sort of penalties and the mechanisms by which that should be administered came out really in 2023. September, I think, of 2023 is when that first came out and sort of was announced. And from that point forward, there has not been any actual documented enforcement that has occurred. So, and I can give you plenty of examples and stories of actual information blocking that we have observed, that I have observed. There has been thousands, I believe, of cases that have been filed with the ONC and OIG, and yet not a single sort of enforcement action has been taken. And so this is akin to, we may say as a society, hey, we're going to enforce speed limits on highways, right? And we say, great, we're all very excited about this. This is good for public safety. Well, if it's kind of known that, you never get a ticket, then yeah, everyone sort of collectively agrees it's a good thing to do, but you're behind the wheel and you want to get somewhere fast, and so you speed, right? As soon as that enforcement actually starts to become a thing, then people start to comply, and I think that's still what we're waiting for as an industry. Is we're waiting to see that compliance and that enforcement action, which will start, in my mind, to bring everybody in line.
It's certainly a fair point because, as you said, if the regulation exists and you know what it takes to comply, but no one's holding your feet to the fire, kind of where is that motivation to do it, especially if it's going to require some change in process. So I guess maybe kind of parallel to that, while waiting for strict enforcement action by the regulating agency, do you see individuals themselves or other market forces potentially spurring positive change?
Well, so I mean, I think first and foremost, what's been incredibly positive is the conversation and the community organizing efforts that, frankly, CMS has been pushing. So we committed back in the summer to the CMS Interoperability Pledge, and 40 other organizations did, and since then I think over 100 have since committed. And it's been really positive to see the conversation where, broadly speaking, most just general people walking around, want this. And now there's become more of a voice to it of people that continue to be very passionate about the need for, information to be shared and made accessible. I think what makes this hard generally is the fact that when you don't really, frankly, care as just a general person, you don't really care until you really care when it comes to being able to access your medical records. If you're, fine and just walking down the street, That ability to get access to your medical records is, a theoretical, sure, I should, but do I need them today? Probably not. Not necessarily part of people's daily lives, right? But when you need them, you really need them, right? Because then it really matters. And then that's where decisions are being made that are going to impact your life, literally. And in that moment, right, that's not where you want to start thinking about, calling up your congressman or your senator or whoever it is. Right, you just want to have access to your records. So thankfully, I think, and this is all very confusing to people generally, even as well. If I try to explain to my mom what I do, I think her first response is, "What is a medical record?" Right. So, but I think what's important is there's becoming more of a groundswell, and there's becoming more of an understanding that we need to push for this, and we need to apply that pressure, because that's the other side of this too, right? The other side of this is there's a lot of motivation to want to hold on to data, right? Data is valuable. And so people who have access to it don't want to just lose that access, because there's a lot of opportunity that they have to, to leverage that data and to create value from it. But this obviously gets back to something that, I often talk about, which is at the end of the day, who owns a medical record? And frankly, if it's owned by anyone, right, it should be owned by the patient, by the individual.
Yeah, no, and calling that out, it also raises an interesting twist, because, looking at the law, that might not always be the expected case. But Jason, believe it or not, we're already almost out of time. So I'll close with one final question of, kind of building off of everything we talked about. Do you foresee anything happening in the coming year that you think will shift the conversation and potentially see data loosen up a little bit?
Yeah, I'm again, I've been impressed by what I've seen, again, coming out of, CMS and ONC and HHS. And so I have to believe that as much as, I am obviously impatient, I have to believe they've committed to, making enforcement of information blocking a real priority. And again, if we start to see that, which I believe we will, I have to continue believing that we're going to continue marching down this path in a way that makes sense. We're going to see real change occur. And then we're going to see a lot of really exciting things happen, right? On the demand side, as I talk about, there's a lot of really, really great things happening between, AI powered, clinical decision support, things that are going to remove, kill the clipboard, as CMS has put it, has certainly always been something I've cared a lot about. I hate writing down my medical information on a clipboard. I've hated that for a long, long time. And so the ability to see a lot of what's happening on the demand side start to take shape and be really, really cool and innovative. But none of that matters. None of that makes a difference, right? If you don't fix the supply side. I can have the most exciting, chatbot leveraging AI to help me understand my medical records. But if, again, for me, Jason, there's nothing returned, then it's going to say, I know nothing about you, how you doing? And that's the best it can do.
Yeah, well, hopefully, as I said, that hopper begins to get filled up, and hopefully positive trends to be able to keep an eye on as we go forward. But as I said, believe it or not, we are already out of time, and I want to thank my guest, Jason Prestinario, for a great conversation today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Matt.
And thank you to everyone listening. Keep the dialogue going and connect with me at hashtag HCDEJURE. I'm Matt Fisher. Until next time.